What if the key to a dying valley was hidden not in the ground, but in the stars? And what if the only person who could read that celestial map was the invisible waitress a billionaire was about to crush for sport? He laughed, a sound like tearing silk, and made the offer as a joke, a cruel, public spectacle. "I'll give you $10 million if you can make sense of this nonsense," he sneered, tossing an antique chart on the table. But the shy waitress, a young woman drowning in the ghosts of her family's past, did more than make sense of it. She saw through his greed, unraveled a legacy of academic ruin, and in one breathtaking moment, she didn't just silence him. She realigned his universe. This is the story of how a forgotten star chart in the hands of a forgotten woman turned a whisper into a thunderclap. The fallout will change everything. The air in The Gilded Cage was thick with the scent of seared scallops and self-congratulation. It was an atmosphere Elara Bishop had learned to breathe without tasting, a skill she'd perfected over 8 months of navigating the treacherous currents of New York's most exclusive dining room. She was a phantom in a crisp black vest and white apron, her movements economical, her presence designed to be felt, but not seen. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face, usually lost in the quiet stacks of a university library, was set in a mask of polite neutrality. But behind her grey, watchful eyes, a mind that could navigate the cosmos was being crushed by the gravity of a grandfather's disgrace and the crushing weight of her family's subsequent debt. Elara wasn't just shy. She was hermetic. She had been a prodigy, a doctoral candidate at Columbia in the arcane field of historical cosmography and celestial cartography. She could look at a medieval map and not just see the geography, but the theology, the politics, the very fears of the men who drew it. Her specialty was archaeoastronomy, dating historical events by the precise alignment of the stars depicted in ancient art and texts. Then, the scandal that had ruined her grandfather years ago resurfaced. A new article dredging up old accusations of fraud. The family's savings, already depleted, were wiped out by legal fees to defend his legacy. The PhD was abandoned. The ivory tower was replaced by the gilded cage. Now, instead of deciphering the ambitions of long-dead kings, she served men who wielded their own power with the subtlety of a cudgel. Tonight's cudgel was being swung at table 12, the restaurant's prime corner booth that offered a panoramic view of the city lights, a glittering kingdom for the man holding court. His name was Sterling Blackwood. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the species. He was old money, third generation, with a jawline that seemed carved from granite and inherited contempt. His suit was a dark Zegna, his cufflinks platinum, and his eyes, the color of a frozen lake, held a terrifying emptiness. Blackwood was the head of Blackwood Holdings, a corporate leviathan that specialized in acquiring assets, land, water, companies, and squeezing them until they were dust. With him were 2 acolytes, a nervous lawyer named Peterson, whose laugh was a high-pitched bark, and a younger executive, a sycophant named Todd, who nodded at everything Blackwood said with the jerky enthusiasm of a bobblehead doll. Elara was clearing their appetizer plates, her motions a silent ballet of efficiency, when the conversation took a sharp turn. "The geological surveys are a bust," Blackwood growled, his voice a low rumble of irritation. He unrolled a large, expensive-looking printout onto the white linen tablecloth. It was a topographical map of a valley in eastern California, overlaid with drilling sites marked in red. "We've spent 50 million drilling holes in the ground. Nothing but dust and bedrock. The hydrologists are idiots." "But Mr. Blackwood, the seismic data suggested—" Peterson began weakly. "The seismic data suggested a fortune in untapped water. Peterson, An aquifer the size of Lake Mead, right under the driest part of the state. Enough water to make me the king of California for the next century, Blackwood snapped. He jabbed a finger at the map. I bought the whole damn valley, every worthless, sun-scorched acre. Now find me the water. He then pulled a worn leather tube from his briefcase. With a flourish, he unrolled a second document, placing it beside the modern map. It was an antique, a piece of parchment yellowed with age, covered in delicate hand-drawn lines and strange symbols. Elara, pouring water, felt a jolt, a shock of recognition so profound it nearly made her gasp. She knew that chart. She knew the spidery handwriting in the margins, the unique cross-hatching of the mountain ranges. It was a fragment, a piece of her grandfather's last, discredited work. This is the only other clue we have, Blackwood said with a sneer. The old crackpot who owned the land before me, a so-called academic named Alistair Finch, left it behind. Claimed it was a map left by his own grandfather. Look at this garbage. He tapped the parchment. Constellations. He's drawn the damn stars all over the mountains. Orion here, Draco snaking through this canyon. It's the ravings of a lunatic. Ilara's hand trembled, the heavy glass pitcher suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Alistair Finch. The name was seared into her memory. He wasn't some crackpot. He was Professor Alistair Finch, a respected historian and her grandfather's only defender, the man who had lost his own reputation and fortune standing by his friend. And the map wasn't lunacy, it was genius. Her grandfather hadn't been mapping the land. He had been using the land as a canvas for the stars. It was a celestial reference key, a time lock. The positions of the constellations weren't random. They indicated a specific date, a specific moment in time. Todd the sycophant laughed loudly. Maybe there's pirate treasure, Sterling. X marks the spot. Blackwood smirked, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Ilara. He noticed her stillness, the way her eyes were fixed on the chart, her face pale. His predator's instinct kicked in. He saw a fly to pull the wings off of. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he purred. "You see something you like? Does the pretty picture frighten you?" Ilara's throat went dry. "No, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Speak up. I can't hear you," he commanded, enjoying the attention of the surrounding tables, which had quieted to watch the show. She tried to move, to retreat into her cloak of invisibility, but her feet were rooted to the floor. Her mind was screaming. He doesn't see it. He has the lock, but he doesn't understand what a key is. The dismissal of her grandfather's life's work, the casual, arrogant cruelty of this man, it ignited a tiny, cold spark in the depths of her shyness. It's not just a picture," she breathed, the words escaping before she could stop them. The table fell silent. Blackwood's smirk widened into a grin. He leaned back, a king on his throne, and gestured to the chart. "Oh, really? We have an art critic in our midst. An expert, perhaps? Do enlighten us, Waitress. What is it, then?" Peterson and Todd snickered. Ilara felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She wanted to die. But then she looked at the chart again, at the elegant lines of Cygnus the Swan soaring over the highest peak, and the anger burned away the fear. "It's an astronomical overlay," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence. "The topographical features are reference points, but the real map is the star chart. The constellations aren't decoration. They're a date stamp. He's depicted the sky as it would have appeared from that exact valley on the vernal equinox of 1888. He's not telling you where to look. He's telling you when." The silence that followed was absolute. Peterson's jaw hung open. Todd's bobblehead nodding ceased. Sterling Blackwood stared at her. The amusement in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else. Disbelief, then a dark, predatory curiosity. He had no idea if she was right, but he recognized the language of conviction. He knew she believed it. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a sharp, barking roar of ridicule that made people at other tables jump. "A date stamp! By God, that's rich!" he boomed. "A history lesson from the Help. You've been reading too many fantasy novels, little girl." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malicious glee. "All right, miss. Astronomer. Let's play a game. You're so clever. You tell me what this gibberish means. Right here, right now." He tapped a cluster of symbols near the bottom of the chart. "You translate this celestial poetry for me. You do it, and I'll give you $10 million. He said it loudly, for the whole room to hear. A collective gasp went through the diners. It was a joke, a monstrously cruel one. He was dangling an impossible sum in front of a minimum wage worker to maximize her humiliation when she failed. "But if you're wrong," he leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "if you waste one more second of my time with this fairy tale, you're not just fired. I'll see to it you're blacklisted. You won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a back-alley diner. I will own you." The trap was set. The public humiliation was primed. He expected her to stammer, to cry, to apologize and flee. Ilara looked at the chart. She saw the symbols he was pointing to. They weren't gibberish. They were her grandfather's shorthand, a mix of alchemical symbols and Greek astronomical notations. She looked at the mountain of debt that was suffocating her family. She looked at Sterling Blackwood, a man who trampled legacies for profit. The shy, quiet girl who hid in libraries was gone. In her place was the guardian of her family's name. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor she felt in her soul. "The check first." A stunned silence. Then Blackwood roared with laughter again, louder this time. "She's got nerve! I'll give her that! Peterson, write her a check, from my personal account. Date it for tomorrow." Peterson, looking utterly bewildered, fumbled for his checkbook. "It won't be cashable, of course," Blackwood added with a wink to his friends. "But it'll make a lovely souvenir of the night you thought you could play with the big boys." He slid the antique chart across the table. "The floor is yours, prodigy. Silence me." The opulent dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations, dissolved. For Ilara, the world had shrunk to the faded ink on the yellowed parchment. The shyness that had defined her life didn't vanish. It transformed. It was the same deep, cellular focus that allowed her to spend weeks in a dusty archive, tracing the path of a single star across centuries of forgotten texts. It was the quiet of a cryptographer, seeing the pattern in the noise. Sterling Blackwood watched, his lips curled in a permanent smirk, anticipating the delicious moment of her failure. Peterson was scribbling out the check with a flourish, a prop in his boss's cruel theatre. Todd had his phone out, probably ready to record the inevitable breakdown. Ilara ignored them all. She ignored the check being slid next to her. Her gaze was locked on the chart. "You've been drilling," she said, her voice a low murmur. "But you're drilling based on the surface. You think this is a map of the land. It's not. It's a map of the pressure." Blackwood's smirk faltered. "What the hell does that mean?" "Your hydrologists are looking for a water table. A vast, underground lake," she continued, her finger tracing the constellation Draco as it wound through a canyon. "They're wrong. The water isn't sitting in a cavern. It's trapped in porous, subterranean rock strata held under immense geological pressure. It's not a lake, it's a sponge, and you can't get to it by drilling anywhere. You'll just get dust." She moved her finger to the peak, marked with the swan. Cygnus. You need to find the release point, the one spot where the pressure is naturally weakest, where the rock is most fractured. And I suppose your little star chart tells you where that is? Blackwood scoffed, trying to regain control. No, Ilara said, looking up at him for the first time. Her grey eyes were clear and direct. It tells you how to find it. This isn't a single map. It's 3 maps layered on top of each other. The first is the land, the topography. The second is the sky, the date stamp. But the third is the key. She pointed to the margins, filled with what looked like decorative scroll work. To Blackwood, it was ornamentation. To Ilara, it was a legend. This isn't just scroll work. It's a key for a transpositional cipher. Each of these symbols, she pointed to a tiny, almost invisible sunburst, corresponds to a star in the constellations. The star's magnitude, its brightness, doesn't represent a distance. It represents a depth. He's created a 3-dimensional model. You use the date, the vernal equinox of 1888, to fix the positions of the stars. Then you use their magnitude to plot the z-axis. The depth. You're not looking for a spot on the ground. You're looking for a point in space, deep underground. Peterson's pen had stopped moving. Todd's phone was forgotten. Blackwood was leaning forward, the condescending amusement gone, replaced by an expression of raw, predatory focus. He didn't understand the science, but he understood the implications. "Do it," he commanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. Ilara took a clean linen napkin. She didn't have a pen, and she wouldn't have asked for one. She dipped her finger into her water glass and began to draw on the starched white cloth, the damp lines dark against the fabric. "The cluster you pointed to earlier," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The gibberish. It's here, under the constellation Lyra." She drew the constellation from memory. The symbols aren't a language, they're instructions. This one, she traced a small triangle, is the Greek symbol for delta. This spiral is a variant of the alchemical symbol for sublimation, and this number isn't a number, it's a declination angle. She paused, looking directly at Blackwood. Translated, it reads, "From Delta Lyrae, follow the angle of sublimation, 23.4 degrees from vertical. The brightest point is the weakest." She looked back at the chart. The brightest star in Lyra is Vega. He's telling you to find the point on the ground directly beneath where Vega would have been in the sky on that night in 1888. From there, you don't drill straight down. You drill at an angle of 23.4 degrees, aiming for the subterranean point that corresponds to Vega's magnitude. That's the release point. That's where you'll find your water. She finished her drawing. The napkin held a crude but clear diagram. A mountain range, a constellation, and a single angled line piercing the earth. The table was tomb-silent. The only sound in the entire restaurant seemed to be the frantic beating of Ilara's own heart. Sterling Blackwood stared at the damp napkin. He stared at the complex, impossible logic that she had laid out with such unnerving certainty. He looked at Peterson, his lawyer, whose face was ashen. Peterson was a man of contracts and clauses, but he recognized the terrifying ring of truth when he heard it. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was knowledge. Blackwood slowly, deliberately, picked up the $10 million check. He tore it into 4 perfect squares and let the pieces flutter onto the table. "The joke's over," he said, his voice chillingly soft. The mask of the jovial bully was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating face of the predator who had just found its prey. He saw the other diners watching. He saw the waiters frozen in place. he saw a threat. "Peterson," he said, his eyes locked on Ilara. "Pay our bill, then call security. Have them meet us at the car. We're leaving." "Todd," he continued, "get on the phone with the survey team in California. Tell them to halt all drilling, all of it. I'll have new coordinates for them within the hour." The two men scrambled to obey, leaving Ilara alone at the table with the billionaire. The restaurant began to buzz again, but at table 12, a bubble of absolute cold had formed. Blackwood leaned back. He didn't thank her. He didn't praise her. He assessed her the way he would a mineral right or a stock certificate. "Who are you?" he asked. "Ilara Bishop," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "That's not what I asked," he snapped. "That performance, that wasn't a party trick. Where did you learn that?" I was a student at Columbia, historical cartography." "Was," he repeated, latching on to the word. "And now you're a waitress. Why?" "My family. We had some trouble. I had to leave." "I see," he said, though it was clear he didn't care. He steepled his fingers, his frozen lake eyes boring into her. "Well, Miss Bishop, you have a problem. You have information that is proprietary to Blackwood Holdings. That chart is my property. Your interpretation of it is my property. You work for me now." Ilara's stomach turned to ice. I'm not looking for a job." "That wasn't an offer," he said flatly. "That was a statement of fact. You will come with me, now. You will provide the precise coordinates. In return, I will not destroy you. I might even give you a finder's fee. 100,000, perhaps. A generous sum for a night's work." He was stealing it. He was stealing her grandfather's legacy, her knowledge, everything, and offering her scraps. The anger, cold and pure, returned. "No," she said. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up. He was not a man who heard that word often. "No?" "The price was $10 million, Ilara said, her voice shaking but resolute. "That was the offer you made, in front of this entire room. I solved your puzzle. I expect you to honor your wager." He stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "You have spirit. I admire that. But you are incredibly, dangerously naive. That was public theater, Miss Bishop, not a contract. Now you have two choices. You can walk out of this restaurant with my security team and a new, very lucrative career. Or you can walk out of here alone, and before you reach the subway, my legal team will have filed an injunction against you for theft of intellectual property. They will bury you in litigation until you and your family are begging on the street. By morning, everyone you've ever known will believe you are a fraud and a thief. The choice is yours." He stood up, towering over her. "My car is waiting." But as he turned, another voice, calm and measured, cut through the tension. "I believe there's a third option." Both Ilara and Blackwood turned. A man was standing by their table. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that were a startlingly kind shade of blue. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored grey suit, but he carried an air of authority that was quieter, yet somehow more profound than Blackwood's bluster. Ilara had seen him earlier, dining alone at a small table in the corner, observing. Blackwood's face darkened. "Finch, what the hell are you doing here?" The man smiled faintly. "Enjoying a quiet dinner, Sterling, until you decided to turn the place into a Roman circus." He turned his gaze to Ilara, and his smile warmed. "Alistair Finch," he said, extending a hand. "And you, young lady, must be Ilara Bishop. You have your grandfather's eyes." Ilara stared, her mind reeling. Alistair Finch, her grandfather's defender, the crackpot who had lost everything. He was real. He was here. You know her, Blackwood snarled. I know of her, Finch corrected gently. I knew her grandfather, Professor James Bishop. He was a great man, a visionary. And you, Sterling, are in possession of his stolen property. He gestured to the chart, which Blackwood had hastily rolled up. That map belongs to my family. It belongs to the land which I own, Blackwood hissed. Now get out of my way. I don't think so, Finch said, his voice losing its gentle edge. You see, the third option is this. Miss Bishop walks out of this restaurant with me. She is now under my employ. And if you or your lawyers so much as send her a threatening email, I will countersue you for the theft of that chart and for the slander of 2 academic reputations. My pockets aren't as deep as yours, Sterling, but my cause is just, and I have a very, very good memory. He looked at Elara. Miss Bishop, your choice. The world had tilted on its axis. 2 billionaires, 2 titans were fighting over her at a table in a restaurant. One offered a gilded cage. The other offered, what? A chance to fight back. She looked at Sterling Blackwood's face, contorted with rage and thwarted greed. Then she looked at Alistair Finch's kind, determined eyes. It wasn't a choice at all. She stood up, her legs trembling. I'll go with Mr. Finch. She walked away from the table, past the stunned faces of the diners. As she passed Blackwood, he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. Elara met his gaze, the last vestiges of her fear burning away in a blaze of defiance. No, she said, pulling her arm free. You did. When you underestimated me. She walked towards Alistair Finch and the exit, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as the sole inheritor of a secret written in the stars. The game was not over. It had just begun. The cool air of the Manhattan street was a welcome shock after the pressurized atmosphere of the restaurant. Elara felt as if she had surfaced after holding her breath for an hour. She was unemployed, had just publicly defied one of the most ruthless men in the city, and had thrown her lot in with a man she'd only ever known as a tragic figure from her family's history. Are you all right? Alistair Finch's voice was gentle, pulling her from her daze. A black town car, sleek and unassuming, had pulled up to the curb. A driver held the door open. I think so, she stammered. Mr. Finch, I don't understand. How did you— I've been keeping tabs on Sterling for years, he said, as he ushered her into the plush leather interior of the car. I knew he'd acquired my family's old land. I suspected he was after the water. When my sources told me he was dining here tonight, I decided to observe. I never imagined I'd witness that. He shook his head, a look of wonder on his face. Your grandfather would have been so proud, Elara. He always said the key wasn't in the ground, it was in the looking up. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Elara sank back into the seat, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. He has the chart fragment. He knows the location of Vega and the angle. He has a sentence, but he doesn't have the language, Alistair countered. He's arrogant. He'll assume that's all there is to it. He'll drill at that angle from that one spot. He'll find nothing. How can you be so sure? Alistair smiled, a sad, knowing expression. Because what you translated wasn't the final instruction. It was the first part of a combination lock. James, your grandfather, was brilliant, but he was also cautious. He encoded the full activation sequence across 3 different charts. Sterling has the first, I have the second. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a leather tube identical to Blackwood's. He unrolled another piece of parchment. It was a continuation of the same valley, but this one was covered with different constellations: Cassiopeia, Perseus, and more of her grandfather's unique, coded script. "My God," Ilara whispered, her fingers hovering over the parchment. "Where did you get this?" "It was my grandfather's. He and your great-grandfather were partners. They discovered the aquifer together, back in the late 19th century. They knew it was a geological marvel, something that could transform the entire region, but they also feared it. They knew what men like Blackwood would do with that kind of power, so they created the maps, a puzzle that could only be solved by someone who understood their work, who respected the harmony between the earth and the sky. They split the charts between their families for safekeeping. But there's a third chart," Ilara said, her mind racing. "The combination has 3 parts." Alistair's expression grew somber. "Yes, and that is our problem. Your grandfather had the third chart. It was in his study at Columbia, along with his journals explaining the final cipher. When the scandal broke, the university seized all of his research. They locked it away in their archives, labeling it academically unsound. It's been buried there for 15 years. The full picture slammed into Ilara with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about water or money. This was about vindication. The research that had destroyed her grandfather's reputation was the very thing that could save them now. "We have to get it back," she said, her voice filled with a new, fierce determination. "It won't be easy," Alistair warned. "The archives are a fortress, and Blackwood will be moving heaven and earth now. He's been humiliated. He won't just be looking for water anymore. He'll be looking for revenge. He'll come after you, Ilara. He'll try to discredit you, to prove you're a fraud, just like they did to your grandfather." The car stopped in front of a stately old brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in the West Village. "This is where I live," Alistair said. "I have a guest suite. You'll be safe here for tonight. We can make a plan in the morning." For the first time in years, Ilara didn't feel like a ghost. She felt seen. The shy, withdrawn woman who served overpriced wine was gone. In her place was a cartographer with a map to find, a code to break, and a family name to restore. The next morning, the war began. Blackwood's opening salvo was a vicious article on a notorious gossip blog, painting Ilara as a disturbed, fame-hungry waitress who had accosted a prominent businessman. It mentioned her grandfather's scandal, twisting his visionary theories into the ravings of a con man. It was a character assassination, swift and brutal. "He's trying to poison the well," Alistair said, his face grim as he read the article on his tablet. "He wants to ensure that if you do come forward with the full map, no one will believe you." "So we fight back," Ilara said, a cold calm settling over her. The article hurt, but it also clarified things. There was no going back. Their first move was to try the direct approach. Alistair, as a former, though disgraced, colleague, still had some contacts at Columbia. He called the dean of the history department, a man named Dr. Albright, who had been a vocal critic of her grandfather's work. The conversation was short and chillingly predictable. "Albright claims the research is sealed," Alistair reported, hanging up the phone. "He says it's part of a closed academic integrity review. It's nonsense, of course. He's stonewalling. He helped build his career on the rubble of your grandfather's, and he won't risk having that foundation crumble." "Is there another way?" Ilara asked. "There is always another way," Alistair said, a twinkle in his eye. "Your grandfather was a creature of habit and deep institutional knowledge. He knew the library system at Columbia better than the librarians. He often spoke of the ghost archives, unlisted, forgotten storage rooms where old collections were sent to die. If he wanted to hide his most important work, he wouldn't have put it in his office. He would have hidden it in plain sight, right in the heart of the system. For the next week, they became academic detectives. Ilara's dormant knowledge of the Columbia library system roared back to life. She and Alistair spent hours in his study, surrounded by old university blueprints and archival catalogues. She remembered her grandfather mentioning a specific collection he'd been curating, the Montgomery Collection of Celestial Cartography, a set of obscure 17th-century star charts. It was his pet project, Ilara recalled, her eyes lighting up. The university had acquired it, but didn't have the budget to catalogue it properly. It was stored in the sub-basement of the rare book and manuscript library. The sub-basement, Alistair mused. A perfect place to hide a tree in a forest. Getting in was the challenge. The archives were accessible only to faculty and doctoral candidates with specific clearance. Ilara's access had been revoked years ago. "I may have a way," Alistair said after a moment's thought. He made another call, this time to a man named Elias Vance, the library's head of preservation. Elias was a cantankerous old scholar who had been at the library for 50 years and valued old books more than most people. He had also been one of her grandfather's few friends. They met Elias in a small, dusty coffee shop near the campus. He was a small man with a cloud of white hair and thick glasses that magnified his perpetually skeptical eyes. "James Bishop was a genius," Elias said, his voice a gravelly whisper after Alistair explained their situation. "And Albright is a pompous fool. They treated James like a criminal. Locked away his life's work." He took a sip of his espresso. "The Montgomery Collection is in Sub-Archive 4. It's a climate-controlled, high-security area. I can get you in, but I can only give you 1 hour. After that, the evening security sweep begins. If you're found, I'll deny everything. You'll be on your own." That night, they put their plan into action. Elias met them at a service entrance, his face a mask of nervous tension. He led them through a labyrinth of silent, book-lined corridors, the air smelling of old paper and binding glue. They descended flight after flight of stairs, deep into the belly of the university. Sub-Archive 4 was a cold, sterile room, filled with rows of towering metal shelves. The silence was absolute. Elias pointed to a section at the far end of the room. "The Montgomery Collection. Your hour starts now." He retreated into the shadows by the door, a worried ghost. Ilara's heart pounded. This was it. She and Alistair began their search. The collection was massive, hundreds of leather-bound folios and map tubes. They were looking for something that didn't belong, something modern hidden among the antiques. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. 45 minutes in, they had found nothing. Despair began to creep in. "Think, Ilara," Alistair whispered. James was a cosmographer. He thought in patterns. He wouldn't have just placed it randomly. Patterns, stars, constellations. Ilara's eyes scanned the labels on the shelves. They were organized alphabetically by cartographer. Abel, Bra, Copernicus. Then she saw it. A name that didn't fit. Finch, A. Tucked between Flamsteed and Galileo. "Alistair," she breathed. "Look." It was a simple, modern archival box, deliberately misfiled under his name. Her grandfather had hidden it, using his friend's name as a shield. Inside the box were not one, but 2 items. The first was a leather-bound journal. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the pages, dense with equations and notes. The second was the 3rd chart. Unrolling it, Ilara gasped. It was the same valley, but this map was different. It wasn't a star chart. It was a geological cross-section, a detailed diagram of the rock strata deep beneath the earth. And overlaid on top of it was a complex geometric pattern. a web of lines and angles that made no immediate sense. "This is the final cipher," she whispered, tracing the lines with her finger. "The other two maps give you the location. This one tells you how to turn the key." Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the archive hissed open. Two uniformed security guards stood there, their faces grim, and behind them, a triumphant smirk on his face, was Dr. Albright. "Well, well," Albright said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Mr. Finch, I thought I might find you here, and you must be the disgraced Professor Bishop's granddaughter. It seems a penchant for academic theft runs in the family." Elias Vance stepped forward, his face pale. "There's been a misunderstanding." "Save it, Elias," Albright sneered. "I've suspected for weeks that Finch would try something like this. I had a silent alarm tripped on this collection. You're all trespassing in a restricted area. And you," he pointed a shaking finger at Ilara, "are attempting to steal university property." One of the guards stepped forward and took the chart and the journal from Ilara's hands. "This is a grave mistake, Albright," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. "The only mistake was letting your friend's fraudulent research poison this university for so long," Albright retorted. He turned to the guards. "Escort them to the security office. I'll be calling the police." As they were led out, Ilara saw Albright looking at the chart and journal with hungry, covetous eyes. He hadn't just caught them. He had just acquired the final pieces of a puzzle he could now claim to have solved himself. They hadn't just been caught. They had been checkmated, or so it seemed. The security office was a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee. The air was thick with defeat. Albright had the journal and the final chart. The police were on their way. It was over. "I'm so sorry, Alistair," Ilara said, her voice hollow. "I led you right into his trap." "Nonsense," Alistair replied, though his face was etched with worry. "We were bold. Sometimes boldness doesn't pay off." But Ilara's mind was racing, replaying the last few moments in the archive. The geometric pattern on the third chart, the dense equations in the journal, Albright's triumphant smirk. He didn't just want to stop them, he wanted the discovery for himself. And Sterling Blackwood. He would pay anything to get his hands on it. "He's not going to call the police," Ilara said suddenly. Alistair looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If he calls the police, it becomes a public record. Trespassing, attempted theft. The university would be forced to conduct a full, transparent investigation into my grandfather's research to determine its ownership and value. Every academic rival, every journalist would be digging into it. Albright doesn't want transparency. He wants control. He's not going to call the police. He's going to call Sterling Blackwood." As if on cue, the door opened. It wasn't a police officer. It was Dr. Albright, holding a phone to his ear, his expression a mixture of greed and excitement. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," he was saying. "I have it, all of it, the final piece of the puzzle. Yes, I believe we can come to a very mutually beneficial arrangement." He hung up and looked at them, his face gleaming with sweat and victory. "Change of plans. Mr. Blackwood is a generous benefactor of this university. He has convinced me that involving the police would cause unnecessary scandal. He is going to handle this personally. He's on his way." The threat was clear. They were no longer in the hands of the university. They were about to be in the hands of a man who operated far outside the law. Ilara's mind went into overdrive. The shyness was a distant memory, burned away by the sheer, cold pressure of the moment. She had seen the final chart. She had held the journal. The images were seared into her eidetic memory. The geometric pattern. It wasn't just a diagram. It was a sequence, an operational schematic. Alistair, she whispered urgently. The third chart, the pattern. It's a sonic frequency map. A what? My grandfather wasn't just a cosmographer. He was a polymath. He studied geology, resonance, harmonics. The equations in the journal, they're for generating resonant frequencies. He found that the rock strata holding the water have a unique crystalline structure. You can't just drill into it. The pressure is too immense. It would collapse. You have to unlock it. She closed her eyes, visualizing the page. He found that if you broadcast a specific, complex series of sonic pulses into the ground at precise locations, the rock will resonate. It will vibrate itself into a state of temporary permeability. It will literally make the rock porous enough to release the water. The pattern on the map isn't a drilling plan. It's a musical score. Alistair stared at her, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. My God. So even with the map and the journal, they'll fail, Ilara finished. They'll see the equations and think they're for seismic analysis. They'll see the pattern and think it's a grid for micro-drilling. They will never understand that they're holding a key that needs to be sung, not forced. The door opened again. This time it was Sterling Blackwood, flanked by two men who were built like refrigerators and wore the same dead-eyed expression. "Finch," Blackwood said, his voice a low growl. He was radiating a cold, triumphant fury. "I should have known you'd be slithering around, and the little prodigy." His eyes fell on Ilara, and they were filled with venomous satisfaction. "You should have taken my offer." He snatched the journal and chart from Albright. "Thank you for your civic-mindedness, Doctor. A generous donation to your department will be forthcoming." He glanced at the complex pages, his expression one of greedy confusion. "This is it?" "It's all there, Mr. Blackwood," Albright said eagerly. "The final coordinates, the geological data. It's the key." "Excellent," Blackwood said. He turned to his men. "Escort our friends here to a place where they can't cause any more trouble. I have a plane to catch. We're going to California." He was going to fail. He was going to take this priceless, elegant solution and apply his usual brute force. He would try to drill the pattern, and he would end up causing a seismic event that could shatter the crystalline strata forever, sealing the aquifer permanently. He wouldn't just fail to get the water. He would destroy it. Ilara knew in that moment that she was the only person on Earth who could stop him. She was the only one who held the complete score in her head. As Blackwood's men moved towards them, she spoke, her voice ringing with an authority that made them all pause. "You're going to fail, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood turned slowly, an indulgent, cruel smile on his face. "Oh, I am? Pray tell, why is that?" "Because that," she said, pointing to the documents in his hand, "is not a map. It's an instrument, and you have absolutely no idea how to play it." He laughed. "I have the best engineers in the world. We'll figure it out." "No, you won't," Ilara said, taking a step forward. "You'll drill, you'll blast, and you will fracture the capstone rock, sealing that aquifer forever. You will turn the greatest natural water reserve in this country into a tomb, all because you are too arrogant to listen." A flicker of doubt appeared in Blackwood's eyes. Her certainty was unnerving. "I'll make you a new offer, Mr. Blackwood," Ilara said, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "A final wager. You take me with you. You take Mr. Finch. You let me implement the sequence as my grandfather designed it. If I'm wrong, if I fail, you can leave us in the desert. We will disappear. But if I'm right, the water is yours. But the discovery, the patent for the sonic extraction process, and the legacy, That belongs to James Bishop and Alistair Finch. You get the water, but we get the credit. We get our names back." It was an audacious, desperate gamble. She was offering to give him the prize in exchange for the one thing he didn't value: honor. Blackwood stared at her, his mind calculating. The risk of failure, of destroying the very thing he'd spent a fortune on, versus the word of this strange, intense young woman. "Why should I trust you?" he hissed. Alistair Finch stepped forward. "Because she is the only one who can read the music, Sterling. And right now, you are holding a Stradivarius and preparing to use it as a hammer. You need her. You know you do." The silence stretched. Blackwood's eyes darted from Ilara to Alistair, then to the incomprehensible documents in his hand. The seed of doubt had taken root. "Fine," he finally bit out, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. "Bring them. But know this," he fixed his gaze on Ilara. "The moment I think you're playing me, the desert will be the least of your worries." The flight to California was on Blackwood's private jet, a flying monument to opulent paranoia. Ilara and Alistair sat in silence, captives on an expedition to their own legacy. Blackwood and his team of grim-faced engineers huddled at the other end of the cabin, poring over the chart and journal, their expressions growing more frustrated by the hour. Ilara could hear their muttered confusion. "The math is recursive. These geological terms are archaic. What the hell is a harmonic cascade?" They were seeing the notes but couldn't hear the melody. They landed on a private airstrip in the Mojave Desert. The heat hit like a physical force. A fleet of black SUVs waited to take them to the valley, a vast, sun-bleached bowl of rock and sand surrounded by jagged mountains. It was beautiful and desolate, a sleeping giant. Blackwood's operation was already in full swing. A massive drilling rig stood silent, a monument to his previous failures. Dozens of technicians and geologists milled about a makeshift command center. The atmosphere was tense. "All right, Miss Bishop," Blackwood said, his voice tight with impatience, as they stood before a bank of monitors displaying seismic data. "The stage is yours. Where do we begin?" This was the moment. Ilara took a deep breath, the dry desert air searing her lungs. She had the full sequence in her mind. The 2-star charts provided the where, a triangular area of about a square mile between the points corresponding to Vega, Deneb, and Altair, the stars of the summer triangle. The 3rd chart provided the how. "First, you need to shut down everything," Ilara commanded, her voice surprisingly firm. "All engines, all generators. We need absolute seismic silence." Blackwood's lead engineer, a man with a perpetually skeptical expression, scoffed. "That's ridiculous. We need power to run the equipment." "The equipment you'll be using is not your drill," Ilara said, turning to him. "Do you have sonic emitters, wide-spectrum transducers?" The engineer exchanged a baffled look with Blackwood. "We have seismic thumpers for surveys, but they'll have to do," Ilara cut him off. She walked to a large topographical table map of the valley. "I need 3 of them. I want one placed here," she pointed, "at the Vega coordinate. The second one here, at Deneb, and the third, here, at Altair." For the next 2 hours, Ilara directed the placement of the equipment with a precision that left the engineers both impressed and unnerved. She was no longer a waitress. She was a field marshal commanding an army. Alistair stood by her side, a silent, supportive presence. Finally, everything was in place. The valley was eerily quiet. The sun began to dip towards the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Now what?" Blackwood demanded, his patience worn thin. "Now," Ilara said, looking at the command center's main console, "we play the music." She handed the lead engineer a series of numbers she had written down. These are frequencies and durations. You're going to broadcast them from the emitters in a precise sequence. The first frequency from the Vega emitter, then the second from Deneb, then the third from Altair. It's a round, a harmonic cascade. We build the resonance slowly. The engineer typed in the commands, his skepticism warring with his professionalism. Broadcasting first frequency. A low hum, almost too deep to hear, but felt as a vibration in the soles of their feet, emanated from across the valley. It was a single, pure tone. For a minute, nothing happened. "This is a waste of—" Blackwood began, but Ilara held up a hand. "Wait." She gave the next command. The second emitter kicked in, its frequency slightly higher, harmonizing with the first. Then the third. The deep hum grew, the vibrations becoming more distinct. The air itself seemed to thrum with a strange energy. On the seismic monitor, a tiny green line that had been flat began to show a faint, rhythmic tremor. "It's working," Alistair breathed. For the next hour, Ilara called out frequencies, building the harmonic wave, layer by layer. It was an intricate, complex process. One wrong note, one incorrect duration, and the entire resonance structure would collapse. Blackwood and his team watched in stunned silence, their faces illuminated by the green glow of the monitors. The rhythmic tremor was growing, becoming a steady, powerful pulse. The valley was humming. It was singing. "Final sequence," Ilara announced, her voice strained with concentration. "All three emitters, maximum power, on this frequency. Now." The three tones merged into one powerful, resonant chord. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently. A deep, groaning sound came from the earth, like a waking beast. And then it happened. From the center of the triangle, formed by the emitters, a plume of dust shot into the air. It was followed by a geyser, a massive, roaring column of pure, clean water, erupting from the desert floor, climbing hundreds of feet into the twilight sky, catching the last rays of the setting sun like a fountain of liquid diamonds. The command center erupted. Engineers were shouting, hugging, staring in disbelief. Sterling Blackwood stood frozen, his face a mask of utter shock and awe. He walked out of the command tent and stared at the impossible fountain, the roar of the water filling the air. He had it. He had his water. Ilara and Alistair followed him out. The cool spray drifted over them, washing away the dust and the tension. Blackwood turned to them. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was a raw, naked astonishment. He looked at Ilara, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a waitress, not as a pawn, but as the conductor of a miracle. "You did it," he said, his voice barely a whisper over the roar of the geyser. "My grandfather did it," Ilara corrected softly. "We just followed his instructions." Blackwood was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "A deal is a deal. You'll have your credit. The Bishop Finch process. It has a nice ring to it." He turned to Alistair. "Your family's legacy is secure." It was not a gracious victory. It was a victory born of necessity and desperation. But it was a victory nonetheless. The resolution was not a single, cinematic moment, but a slow, deliberate process that unfolded over the following year. Sterling Blackwood, true to his word, funneled a fortune into developing the aquifer. But the victory had changed him. The raw, untamable power he had witnessed erupt from the earth had humbled him in a way his billions never could. He became a reluctant custodian, his greed tempered by a newfound respect for the forces he had unlocked. The Bishop Finch process became a landmark in hydrology and geology. Scientific papers were written. Documentaries were filmed. Columbia University, facing a tidal wave of public and academic pressure, issued a formal, posthumous apology to Professor James Bishop, restoring his name and establishing a chaired professorship in his honor. Dr. Albright quietly retired. Alistair Finch, his family's name vindicated, established the Finch-Bishop Foundation, a massive trust dedicated to the ethical management of the water resource and the funding of innovative, interdisciplinary research. He didn't want to be a water king. He wanted to be a guardian. And Alara? She didn't take a dime of the $10 million Blackwood offered her again, this time for real. Instead, she accepted the position of executive director of the foundation. She finished her PhD, her dissertation on her grandfather's work becoming an instant classic in its field. She was no longer the shy, invisible waitress. She was Dr. Alara Bishop, a respected scientist and the steward of her family's legacy. But she never lost the quiet intensity, the ability to see the patterns that others missed. One evening, a year after the geyser first broke the surface, she stood with Alistair on an observation deck overlooking the valley. The single geyser had been replaced by a state-of-the-art pumping station, and a series of aqueducts were already beginning to snake out across the desert, bringing life to the barren land. The stars were coming out in the clear desert sky, the same stars her grandfather had used to draw his impossible map. He would have loved this, Alistair said quietly, following her gaze. To see his music made real. He did see it, Alara replied, a soft smile on her face. He saw it all, 100 years before anyone else. He just needed someone to stop and listen. She had started her journey clearing tables in a gilded cage, a place where men of immense wealth celebrated their power. She ended it here, under an open sky, as the guardian of a power far greater. A quiet woman who had learned that the softest voice can create the most profound echo, an echo that could make the very desert bloom.